super fun, and all about artisan cheese and more to melt your peaceful heart and toast your peaceful life. Coming to you from the Appalachian Mountains of southwestern Virginia, this is the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hey, this is Scott Hall from Peaceful Heart Farm, and you are listening to the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hello, everybody. Melanie Hall here. Hope you're doing well. The conversation today and every day revolves around the value of tradition, traditional homestead living, traditional raw milk products, and artisan cheese. Topics discussed here are designed to create new perspectives and possibilities for how you might add the taste of tradition to your life. Canning peas is great fun. We have been shelling peas for several days. Now that is also quite fun. I'll be talking about that and more in today's podcast. I want to take a minute and say welcome to all the new listeners and welcome back to the veteran homestead-loving regulars who stop by the FarmCast for every episode. I appreciate you all so very much. And I'm so excited to share with you what's going on at the farm this week and all about canning peas. It is a beautiful time of year. Summer has arrived in full force. The days are often sunny and hot. And we could use a lot more rain, but again, it is summer. The rains will be few and far between for the most part, and that means watering the garden and orchard a lot. We really need to get that irrigation system back up and running. Oh well, it's on the very long list of stuff we would like to do. Right now, life is all about canning peas. But first, how about some animal updates? Surprise! Hansel and Gretel, the twin calves, have a new home. Each day, I went out there to give them their bottles, and I looked at them, and I would kind of muse about what are we going to do with these? And then God provided. A man called out of the blue. He actually lives relatively close, about an hour away, and he was frantic for a calf. Just that morning, one of his cows, a Holstein, had lost her calf. And I was happy to say that we did have a calf he could buy. It just said, yeah, okay. And in fact, we had two, and the cow, being a Holstein, she would produce lots and lots and lots of milk, and he could probably use two calves. It happened all so fast. It was unbelievable. Before nightfall, this wonderful man and his wife were here picking up those two calves. It was such a great thing. It was such a win-win situation that they needed these calves, and I needed something to do with them. And anyway, it all happened so fast. I didn't have much of a chance to think about how much I would miss seeing those baby faces every day. But they were pretty calm. They loaded them up in the back of a van, and they were just standing up there in the back of the van. And off they went. So everybody won on that one. Artificial insemination is in progress, and it is less than a week before we see if the AI took. We look for signs from any of the cows that they might be coming back into heat, and if so, we do it all over again. But fingers crossed, all 7 cows and heifers are pregnant on the first try. I don't know what the odds of that are, but we'll find out in the next week. Now, as far as the donkeys go, Scott got all of the donkeys spiffed up with their hooves trimmed really nicely, and they're going to the sale barn. If you would like one of these great animals, let us know soon. Their purpose on our homestead was livestock protection, and now that we have decided to use livestock guardian dogs for that task, their jobs no longer exist, and they will have to move on to help out someone else. Dogs and donkeys actually don't get along really very well unless they were raised together. So I will miss them, especially Daisy and Coco. Well, Sweet Pea and Johnny will also be missed. It was a hard decision, but we have to do the best we can for all of our animals, and the coyote pressure was evidently too much for them. They are miniature donkeys, after all, and perhaps if they'd been full-size donkeys, the job would have been an easy one. In any case, we're moving on with the next plan, and it's how we roll on the homestead. Now, as far as the sheep and goats, I just was checking on possible delivery dates for the sheep. We couldn't find the day on the calendar that we put Lambert back in with the ladies, so we guessed based on the log entries for when the animal predation stopped. Our best estimate indicates that we could have new lambs the last week of October, and that would be such a blessing. We really have no idea how it will go, as we've never tried to breed the ewes for a fall lambing. Many sheep and goats will only breed in the fall for a spring lambing. So the Katahdin breed is supposed to be able to breed year-round, so we shall see. Now, just before I started this podcast, I went out to the spare bedroom to look out the window to see if Scott might be in the garden. I can see the garden and orchard from that window. And it was not really likely, but you never know. He's been working on fixing the deer fencing that was annihilated a few years back during a particularly difficult thunderstorm, so I didn't really think he was in the garden, but you never know. So there were trees down. When this thunderstorm came through, there were trees down everywhere, and one took out some of the deer fencing. And the game cameras that we have out there indicated to Scott that there were 2 deer that were regularly invading the orchard. And that's why the blueberries disappeared. So maybe it was the bear, but really it was probably the deer. And likely the blackberries will be next. Something has also been chomping on the green beans. Now, I knew that would be deer. They love green bean plants. They really love them. Anyway, so I'm looking out the window for Scott, and what do I see? There is a deer pacing up and down outside the garden, not 10, 15, maybe, I don't know how far that is, 20, 30 feet maybe from me, from the window to where she was pacing up and down along that garden fence. And she's looking for a way to get in and to steal more of our bean plants and fruit. And I watched her for a little while. She went up and down a couple of times and sniffing and poking around the fence. And then she laid down right in front of the gate into the orchard. She just plopped down. And I went half an hour later and I looked again, and she was still laying there in front of the gate. Now, I could have opened the door and looked out, and she would hear that noise and likely run away, but I let her rest. It seems Scott has her fenced out, though. No need to upset her even more. Now, the tomatoes in the garden are doing really, really well, and again, we will have to water nearly every day, and fertilizer needs to happen there as well. The tomatoes were planted just in front of the green peas, and green peas, the way that they work is they produce their whopping amount of peas that they're going to produce, and then they'll die off pretty quickly. When it gets hot, they go down quick. And I had 2 70-foot rows of peas. One was a shelling variety, and the other were those lovely sugar snap peas that you can put in your salads and just eat them pods and all. So my original plan was to take them to the farmer's market. And then life happened, and they came on so quickly, there were far too many for me to pick, clean, and package in time for market, which is probably why you don't see them a lot of times at the market. It's a lot of work to get them picked and get them cleaned and get them ready for market. Now, I did pack up two 5-gallon buckets full, and I sold nearly all of those. I put them in like 2-quart bags. They were about 1.5 pounds each, and I had 20 of them, I think. So, I don't know, my math is failing me at the moment, so you can figure out what that was. But I sold nearly all of those. I did give away the last 3, traded them for some eggs. So 2 5-gallon buckets full. Now, because these ripened so quickly and it was hot, they were drying out quickly. So the rest of them, I just simply went out there and pulled up all the plants. And there was a lot of green material along with those peas. But I needed to get them out of the sun quickly, so I'm just pulling these plants up and piling them in the living room floor. And so it was filled with lots of greenery for a few days. Each evening, Scott and I went through the plants and pulled off the peas and separated the peas, put the pea pods in the 5-gallon buckets, and then just stacked the rest of the greenery and put that into large trash bags to go out to the compost. So altogether, there were 5 more 5-gallon buckets of peas that were in the pods. Now, these were too far gone to sell fresh at the market. They just wouldn't have made a good fresh salad pea. So the next challenge was getting the peas shelled out so I could can them. And also, they wouldn't really have frozen that well either. Some of them were starting to be dried peas, and so they would need to be canned. So this is actually still a work in progress, working with these peas. And that brings me to the topic of the day, which is canning peas. So within a couple of evenings of shelling out these peas, my 3-gallon stainless steel pot was full. Now, 3 gallons in quart jars, that's a nice even dozen. So I figured with leaving headspace and all that I could probably stretch it to 14 jars and fill my American Standard canner. It is tall enough to hold 2 levels of 7 jars each. Most canners, maybe you know or don't know, that they hold about 7 jars for a nice large canner. But mine's a double stack, so I can do 14. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So Scott and I have spent 3 or 4 days so far shelling peas in the evening after chores and after dinner. So we're re-watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Scott saw what I'd picked out for entertainment while we shelled peas, and he commented something along the lines of, "I guess you are expecting this to take a while." And indeed, I did and do. We are nearing the end of the extended versions of the third movie. I don't really know how many hours that entails. I'm thinking 3+ hours for each film. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And so that would be in excess of 9 hours so far that we've spent shelling peas. And we have 3 of the 5 buckets shelled out. So we got 2 more evenings of that. We have I have 1 canner full from the first 2 buckets. That was the first 2 buckets filled up that 3-gallon stainless steel pot. And then we did another bucket, so now it's half full again. And then we have 2 more buckets, so I'm going to fill it up again. So I'm thinking that if everything plays out the way that it has, and it takes that 3-gallon to make 14 jars, and I will have 2.5 of those, I should end up with 35 jars of canned peas, quart jars of canned peas. Now that should last a while, don't you think? We do like peas, so we'll go through them quite quickly. Now, canning the peas is the easiest part of this whole scenario. I know that some of you may be hesitant about canning, but once you know and understand how it's done, it comes down to what size jar you use and how much time will that be at 12 pounds pressure. Everything else is going to be the same. 12 pounds of pressure for us. We're over the 1,000 feet elevation mark. The standard in the Ball canning book is 10 pounds of pressure for canning just about anything that would require a pressure canner. And I have a really nice gauge on I have a really nice canner, and it allows me to bring the pressure up to 12 pounds quite easily. Otherwise, if I use my smaller canner, I just end up using the pressure gauge that just sits on there and wobbles and spits steam when the pressure's reached. So there's no other indication other than the wobbling and the spitting of the steam. And I'm ahead of myself again. Let me give you the basics of canning in a nutshell. Hopefully, you'll see that it is not as onerous a task as you might think. I used to think that canning was really, really hard, and I dreaded the late summer as I would have to begin canning the harvest. Now, that was years ago when I was just getting started. But after the first couple of years, it became second nature to me, and you can get there as well. When canning peas, beans, carrots, corn, greens, and so on, the steps are the same. It's just the time that you hold the jars at the pressure is the only thing that changes, and it depends on the size of the jar and what your vegetable is. So I simply bring out the Ball canning book, check the time for the vegetable that I'm canning and the size jar, whether it's pints or quarts, and everything else is pretty much the same. And it's simple for cold packing, which is what I do. That means the vegetables are not cooked or otherwise heated. The jars are supposed to be heated, but I never actually do that either. So step 1 is getting your equipment ready. I set up the canner on the stove top. I put 3 quarts of water in it, and that's just enough to have about 1.5 inches of water from the bottom of the canner. That's going to be pretty standard for the American standard canner. Refer to whatever your instructions are for your particular canner. But then I add about a tablespoon of vinegar to the water, and that can be kind of detrimental to the ring, making them rust, but it makes keeping the inside of the canner clean a breeze. That's a tip I picked up a couple of years ago. The inside of my canner had become dark and discolored, and then I saw a canning video on YouTube, and that YouTuber added vinegar to prevent that. And I started doing it, and my canner now looks like new inside. So I put the water in there, and I add a tablespoon of vinegar to make sure I keep that no minerals building up inside of my canner. Anyway, get the canner set up, and then I turn the burner on low and slowly heat that water and vinegar. It will be just about at a boil by the time I get everything else done, and then I can stick the lid on and off we go. So the other equipment you want to get ready are your jars. That means making sure they're free of cracks and nicks at the rim. They need to be cleaned and sterilized. Lots of folks immerse them in boiling water. I use bleach water. It's faster, and that means a lot to me when I'm canning. The canning is not hard to do, but it can be time-consuming waiting for this to boil and that to boil and so on. So if using soapy bleach water to clean and sanitize my jars is not safe, someone let me know in the comments along with why that would be. My mom used to put her jars on a baking sheet and stick them in the oven for a few minutes. I don't know how long that takes, but that was her method of sterilization. Now, you're also going to need, you've got your canner, you've got your jars, you're also going to need a large pot of boiling water to pour over the vegetables once they're in the jars. Go ahead and prepare that now. There's no set amount of water. Guessing is my method here. 12-quart jars filled to the brim will hold 3 gallons. And the peas take up a lot of that space. So I figured no more than a cup or 2 of water per quart of jar of peas would be plenty. And in the end, I actually used less than 1.5 gallons of boiling water for 14 jars of peas. So we got the canner set up, we got the jars clean and sterile, we got water heating up to pour over the veggies. So the equipment is all set up. So the next thing that we are going to do is prepare the vegetables. For canning peas, that means shelling them out and cleaning them up, and that has been the hardest part so far. It was much harder than shelling them out. That just takes time. And then they're in the refrigerator. I just pull them out, and I should be able to just rinse them off and put them in the jars. But you got to get all those little bits of shells and twigs and leaves out, and that was a real challenge. So getting out my shelled peas and getting them cleaned up and ready to go in the jars. And then fill the jars. That's step number 3. Fill up the jars. Put the lids on them. Almost forgot. Add salt if you desire. I always do. It's a 1/2 teaspoon for pint and 1 teaspoon for quarts. Always. It's the same for all your vegetables. And that's why this gets easy. After a while, you don't even have to think about it. It's like, am I doing pints? 1/2 teaspoon. If I'm doing quarts, a whole teaspoon. So you add the salt to the bottom of the jar and then loosely fill the jar with the vegetables. You don't pack them. I fill mine to just below 1 inch of headspace below the rim. Then you're going to fill each jar with boiling water, and you want to fill that all the way up to 1 inch below the rim. You want to make sure that the veggies are covered under the hot water. So I put the veggies in not quite at 1 inch and then put the water all the way up to 1 inch below I put the veggies more than 1 inch below the lid, the rim of the jar, and then with the water, they're completely covered when I bring that up to 1 inch below the rim. You wipe the rims with a damp paper towel or a washcloth. Make sure there's no debris on there. Place your lid and your ring on there, screw it on finger tight, and then put the jar in the canner. And after all the jars are in place, put the canner lid in place and secure it according to your manufacturer's instructions. All right, so we got our jars filled, we got the lids on, we got them in the canner. The next thing we're going to do is bring the canner up to pressure and then start timing. So you turn up the heat on the burner. It's been on low, right? Just getting that water hot, again, you're waiting on things to heat up. So if you already have these things heated up, things go much quicker. So once you put the lid on, you don't actually put the pressure gauge on yet. That's the big weight that lets you identify when the proper pressure has been reached. So it kind of starts dancing around and letting out steam once it reaches its pressure. And again, if you have a gauge like I have, I can use the 10-pound pressure gauge, but I will actually bring it up to 12 or 13 pounds of pressure before that gauge actually starts dancing and letting out the steam. So ideally, it should dance around a few times each minute, and more than that, and you may have too much pressure there, and you'd want to turn down your heat a little bit. So once I get the dancing pressure gauge, I turn down my heat to a medium low. Now that's a 3 on my stovetop dial. After doing a few batches, you will know exactly where to set your stovetop to maintain the proper pressure. Again, mine's at 3. Once it starts dancing, I turn it down to 3. And then I set my timer for the recommended amount of time. For quart jars of canned peas, canning peas, the Ball Canning Book says 40 minutes at the recommended pressure for your altitude. 40 minutes on the timer. Now, when the timer goes off, step number 5, you turn off the heat, wait until the pressure gauge has completely returned to 0. If you don't have the analog dial, what you will have is a pressure relief button that's like popped up when you started putting pressure on it. Now, once that button falls back to its resting position, the pressure is 0. And if you're ever in doubt, just wait 15 more minutes. I mean, that's the thing. People are afraid that the thing is going to blow up on them or whatever. Well, just wait a little bit longer. Now, once the pressure's returned to 0, you remove the gauge. You're not taking the lid off. You remove the gauge. And so that allows, if there's any other steam left in there, it's going to come pouring out. Now, you never do the quick release like you would do with your Instant Pot. You never just pull that pressure gauge off of there. Let the pressure return to normal without any help. If the pressure comes down too quickly, the water's going to bubble up out of your jars and you'll lose liquid, and that'll leave your veggies partly out of the liquid and they'll discolor. And you may have jars that do not seal well if bits of the veggies get under the lid. So let all return to normal naturally. Now, after you've removed the gauge, waiting 5 minutes to ensure all the pressure is normalized is a good idea. Then go ahead and take your lid off. Then you're going to use the special, you might let it cool a little bit longer if you want to, but you use the special tool for removing your jars from the canner and gently place each jar on a towel or a wooden cutting board. Don't adjust the lids, just let them cool down naturally. At this point, you're all done. And what a great job you did. Once the jars are completely cooled, you're going to label them and store them with your other canned foods. You want to give that, usually they say 24 hours. I usually give mine 12 hours or overnight. Once they're completely cooled, then I take off the metal rings and label them and put them on the shelf. All right? Was that easy? That's it for today's podcast, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with the animals on the homestead. Sharing it with all of you is a blessing for me, and I hope it is for you as well. I boiled the steps of canning down to 5. Get your equipment set up, prepare your vegetables, fill the jars and place the lids, bring your canner up to pressure, hold it there, and then a proper cool down afterwards. And that's it. I hope I've inspired you to give canning a try if you haven't already. And I know you probably have lots of questions if you are just starting out. Feel free to contact me, Melanie at peacefulheartfarm.com. That's Melanie at peacefulheartfarm.com. And if you would like me to answer your questions or help you out in any way, I would love to assist you in developing your homestead skills. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcasting service you use. Subscribe. Give me a 5-star rating and a review. All of these help the service to know, hey, people are listening to this, put it in front of more people. And if you like this content and want to help out the show even more, the absolute best way you can do that is to share it with any family or friends who might be interested in this type of content. Share it across all of your social media. Let them know about the Peaceful Heart FarmCast. Thank you so much for stopping by the homestead. And until next time, may God fill your life with grace and peace.